1.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to People Add Value Experience. Today, I have the pleasure and honor of having a discussion with Billy Schleifer. Not only is he an awesome person, he also happens to be my cousin. So a little bit about Billy before I let him jump in is he went to the College of Music, also known as Berklee College of Music. He is and has produced and managed artists as well as bands. He's been an audio engineer and still dabbles on the side. He's a world-renowned musician. He played in Australia. A serial entrepreneur, has multiple businesses. He also now teaches private musicians and artists on the side with music and music business and so on. But at the end of the day, most importantly, he is a musician. So welcome and to PAVE, Billy. We're very excited to have this discussion, and we're going to jump in.
What's happening, cuz?
Hey, good things, good things. So what I'd like to do is just start off on talking through sort of just how we met, in general, because you would think at the end of the day that family's family and you guys all meet up, but we have disparate family members all over the world. But there was one time in our life that we actually sunk up, if you will, and met somewhere. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So, I was in an Air Force family, so traveled around a lot. I was born in Germany. My mom was originally from Korea, and my father was originally from Pennsylvania, as is your dad. And my parents were going through a bit of a split back when I was, I think, in the fifth grade, and so your family kindly took my mom, my sister, and I in, and so I was in fifth grade. That would have, I don't forget how old you. So I'm 45 now. How old are you? 40.
Turning 43 in July.
Okay, gotcha. So you're not that far behind. So
Not
yeah,
too far.
we moved to Beeville, Texas, and we moved there from Korea, I believe. I believe it was Korea, South Korea, and yeah. So I didn't really get to know many of my aunts and uncles prior because I had lived overseas much of my early life, and yeah. So all of a sudden we're in Texas, and I remember Beeville. I remember the radio stations. I remember the schools. I remember getting paddled in school in Beeville. But yeah, so my first meeting, I remember your mom, Aunt Deanna. Uh, I remember she brought this pitcher of sweet tea out, and that was the first time I had ever had sweet tea. And I remember looking um, while I was drinking this sweet tea, and I said, "I think there's something in my tea." And I think it was like a bug of some sort. And yeah, so that was, and that I'll never forget that. That's stuck in my mind to this day.
Yeah, that's pretty much how Texas is. If there's not a bug on you, it's in you or or in your beverage or food or something.
And of course, I remember your voice was you had a significantly higher pitch to your voice than you do these days.
Well, it's funny because I find that I have a high-pitched voice now, so I can only imagine what I sounded like Alvin and the Chipmunks or something like that back in the day. Thank God for puberty. That's that's a good thing.
That was my earliest memory of how we met.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. So yeah, so I wanted to jump in, really discuss a little bit of the background about you, and just give yourself sort of some free reign and talk about, however long back or far back you want to go, and then just sort of how you got to where you're at now.
Oh boy. Let's see. I guess the Cliff Notes outline would look something like this. I was born in Germany on a military installation, Landstuhl Army Medical Center, and that's kind of a famous spot because that's where they typically bring our dead and wounded soldiers prior to bringing them back to the United States, which is the next stop would be Dover, Delaware, which I also lived there right after I lived in Germany. Um, Again, my father was in the Air Force, so I just remember moving every year, 2 years, 3 years. From Delaware, I believe I lived in South Dakota, in Rapid City, and then Texas at some point, I think in San Antonio, and then went to Yokota Air Force Base in Japan, where I went to Partsville Elementary School, and then South Korea, and then finally came back to the United States. And then after I was staying with you guys, my family kind of got back together, and we lived in Hawaii. So that was my first time back, or that was my first time in, I guess or no, not the first time. I went to kindergarten in the public school system here, but then in Hawaii. So from there, my parents decided to, officially split up and call it a day, and ended up moving to southern New Hampshire, where I went to high school. And I was a kind of a skater, troublemaker. Not too much trouble, but just like any old typical teenage kid.
Just enough.
Just enough, just enough. And then I started playing the guitar at about age of 15 and really enjoyed it, although I never thought of anything that was going to be very serious from it. It was just kind of a hobby. And, uh, you know, initially had my sights set on being in law enforcement. So I was going to
Wow.
go to college for my criminal justice degree and had these aspirations to be a state trooper.
Wow.
And so that was the plan. And the summer after I graduated high school, I was involved in a very bad car wreck. And it was pretty traumatic. And at that point, I realized, you can make all the best plans to live a certain type of life, but it can change very quickly. And
Right.
so I figured, with my near-death experience, that um, what I wanted to do life that at that point was whatever I wanted. So,
Yep. Yep.
and regardless of what I guess society told me that I should do, or my parents, or anything else. And I, one of my, or not one of my best friend at the time, we played guitar together. Uh, his name was Michael Andrade. He was going to Berklee College of Music, and so my plan was to kind of work, save up some money, and then go to Berklee. So when I was about 20, I got accepted to Berklee. Um, really worked hard at developing my skill to get into there. Studied under a private instructor who was a teacher out of Berklee. This is the Berklee College of Music in Boston, by the way, not to be confused with the Berklee here in California. uh, so uh, yeah, so I got accepted into Berklee, and then Mike decided to drop out. So that's kind of interesting. Decided to, if I remember correctly, his family only had enough money to send one of their kids to college at a time, so he opted to drop out so his sister could go to college.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I went to Berkeley, and I was all by myself down there, and I was 20 years old, so I was a little bit older than a little bit older than the typical student body that came in, although Berkeley had a wide range of ages for students. And lo and behold, it turns out that I was pretty good. I was pretty good at music. I was kind of a C student in high school. Did sports, did a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But when I went to Berkeley, the only professional sports team they had were the chain smoking team out in front of. It was called the Berkeley Beach. There was probably always, at least at any point in the day, at least 200 people out in front of there just smoking cigarettes. So I was definitely a fish out of water when I went there, but I did really well. And uh, about halfway through, uh, I was always, yeah, already performing, doing things, and then I decided to switch my degree over into business, because who needs a degree to perform, right? So I wanted a fallback plan. So I decided to switch my major into music business, and graduated magna cum laude at
Wow.
um, is that how you pronounce it, magna cum laude, or loud?
Sure. Listen, you're asking the wrong person for that.
Magna something or other. But anyways, I did really well, and then of course, right after Berkeley, um, you know, the rest is sort of history. Got into bands, and you know,
So what was like the genre of music that like one you started off with and then two sort of the bands played? Like did it lean more one way or the other as far as rock or jazz or
definitely not jazz, even though jazz school. But I was always a rock and roll guy, close to being a metalhead. I was really into like prog rock and classic rock. And my initial thing was I would like to, you know, be in a famous prog rock band. Of course, if you know anything about bands in prog rock like Rush or like Dream Theater, it's not exactly a wide market for those types of artists. And so I remember doing this is kind of a funny moment. I remember doing a show. Now the reason I picked up the guitar going back into 94, but 93 or 94, the reason I picked up the guitar was because I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be like Slash. I wanted to be like Kurt Cobain or whatever. And then I remember at Berkeley, all it became about was you know super technical stuff and being the best technical master of my instrument. And I remember I did a Dream Theater show at Berkeley, and I remember looking out into the crowd, and it was nothing but a bunch of judgmental dudes staring at me. And I was like, man, this isn't what I thought rock and roll was. And then I remember my buddy Eduardo, this Italian virtuoso. He said, "Bill, you got to listen to this band U2." And I saw U2 perform in Boston in 2001,
Wow.
and it was the most amazing. It was right after September 11th. It was almost like a religious experience, and that's when I got into playing more normal or contemporary or pop music or pop rock or whatever you want to call it. And that would I guess would be the start of my professional career, basically playing into any type of project that was related to stuff that you heard on the radio, essentially.
Wow.
And then I guess from there, I followed a girl out to LA, who I was with at the time, and she was a country singer. And so I was doing session work. I was playing guitar on people's recordings. I was just doing whatever I could to make money, playing gigs. Um, and that's when I started learning how to record people and produce music as well. So just essentially doing whatever I could. Um, Long story short, that spanned a good amount of time in terms of what I would call the prime of my music career.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I got into the software world. Um, 2015, um, and that was after I, I kind of decided I wanted to quit music for a lot of personal reasons.
Hmm.
Um, uh, did software and sort of applied the same logic. I was really good at it because to me, a piece of software was just like another musical artist. And
Interesting.
with the background in marketing and business that I had, um, you know, I may have faked it a little bit to get the job as director of marketing, as I was director of sales and director of marketing. And if this ever gets out there, I'm sure they probably know. My thing was they were looking for both at the time, and I decided to tell them that I could do both in order to roll in both salaries together so that I could do both jobs and collect a bigger check.
There you go.
The truth was that I never had any experience as a digital marketing or anything like that. But the first month on the job, while I was sort of locked in my section of the office, I was watching videos on YouTube on digital marketing.
One way to learn, right?
Interestingly enough, and then it worked, and I did my job successfully, and then from that point, I became for the marketing and having turned the company around that way. Then I became chief operating officer, um, sort of as a promotion. Once I had gotten the sales and everything, but then it became about making figuring out ways to make the company more lean and efficient, uh, because at the time it was starting to bleed money in other ways in other departments.
Right.
So and got back in. That was a startup type of company, and then after that, got back into music, and then music started doing really well again. But I was getting older, and I didn't want to tour anymore, and I didn't want to live the, uh, I guess, debaucherous lifestyle.
Sure.
Just crazy and yeah, debauchery, I mean, debaucherous, right? Um, and uh, and then at that point, then of course the pandemic comes in, um, completely changes my mind on a lot of things. I decided to start really kind of focus on investing. I started investing a little bit before the pandemic, but then I really got into investing, um, and then decided to go back to my business plan that I had developed in college and at Berkeley. I developed for an entrepreneur class. I,
Mm.
de- I developed a marketing plan on creating a private instruction business.
Ah,
And so I kind of put that to work during the pandemic. And um, while other people were teaching guitar or drums, I decided to start teaching lessons in production, lessons about music business, lessons about songwriting and publishing. Basically the real ways to actually make money at music. I started offering lessons in that. And because I had a pretty good background in technology, a lot of I had people of all ages, like a lot of adults who were well-established producers and engineers, but they were used to the more traditional methods of analog
right.
and in studios, and had no idea about remote desktop software, things like Zoom, and so I was getting paid to basically teach people how to do that as well. So I was a IT support guy and a music all rolled into one.
That's awesome.
That did really well. Investments. I mean, I think we all know how that's going right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But then I also got into getting involved with other companies, utilizing my sales executive and marketing executive background, and to my current company where I am today, Pipe Dream Industries, doing heavy duty coatings, paints, and chemical additives, and utilizing carbon nanotechnologies and things like that.
It's awesome.
So that's kind of the Cliff Notes outline version.
Yeah, that's great, man. Like that's a one of the best summaries I've heard in a long time. Just crunched it all down there, man. What I'd like to do is pull the thread on a couple of those things, if you don't mind. So just to dive in a little bit deeper. So first, right? So looking at the musician standpoint, how you got the guitar, you stood up. Just really wanted to see. So did you lean more towards electric or acoustic in that instance? And did you play or do you play any other instruments?
Um, Sorry, I was just had a really good thing that I could answer that with, but then I realized it's sort of a bad joke. So I'll refrain. The so I started playing guitar, but anybody that plays guitar will tell you that acoustic guitar, electric guitar, it's all kind of the same thing, right? Guitar is a guitar, and especially when you start doing it in a professional capacity, you got to be able to utilize both, and then in many cases, anything with strings at that point. So I've actually done a lot of work with a bass, playing basses. I got one in the background there, and essentially, musicians, we need the money so bad that we'll just say yes, and then we'll figure it out.
Right. I
So
understand.
you could put a rubber band on a mop handle, and we'll figure out a way to make something out of
Do
it.
some bluegrass. Yeah.
I'm sorry. What was the first? You said other
So
than
yeah, just
guitar.
looking at, do you play any other instruments outside of just the guitar? And did you lean? It sounds like you didn't necessarily lean towards one or the other. It's really just whatever the band needed at that time frame and whatever again the genre. If it was more intimate, I'm assuming it would probably be acoustic, and then if it was the normal pop rock, the electric. But do you play any other instruments or learn it? Did you learn?
Well, okay. So I guess there's two ways to sort of look at that. In my professional career as a more of a session guitar player, a session musician, it was primarily for guitar, sometimes bass, and then if it was studio work, you'd essentially show up with all of it, and then I'll lay acoustic guitar part, I'll lay an electric guitar part, I'll play a solo, I'll record a bass. Um, and that's how that worked. And even for the live stuff, my job on the live end was a little bit different. I initially got brought in as a session guitar player, but then I evolved into a musical director. So my job was I was hired by record labels to put together bands for artists. So a lot of times you may think that what you see is a band out there, but it turns out it's not really a band. It's a band name, but it's really one or two key players within that group. Usually it's the people that write the songs or control, the financial interests or the intellectual property, like publishing and things like that. So I would get brought in, hire the band that sort of fits the bill or fits the look, make sure that everybody sounds good, and then get them ready for touring, and then we'd go out on the road and things like that. Um, on the producer side of things, uh, I learned how to program drums. I learned how I really made use of a lot of the technology that's available. So I would either hire people, but for me personally, I tend to lay a lot of the guitars and bass myself, and I use programs where I can kind of pseudo play the piano,
Gotcha, gotcha.
but program the drums. So in the producer capacity, I can turn out a finished product from beginning to end, and play everything myself, so to speak.
So
All
did you find as the digital engineering, oh, I guess it's digital sound engineering. Um, I'm assuming so like because you were able to dive in, it sounds like that was just the aptitude that you have and that capability to learn that. Have you found it sort of hindering now, right? Because a lot of people are talking about AI and how that may be taken away from certain graphic artists with the programs out there. Have you found that, I guess it sounds like you complement what you do now with it, but are there any, musicians and artists that feel a little threatened by that coming out?
That's a good question. I mean, I think everybody gets I think everybody gets a little threatened whenever there's any sort of advancements in technology. Um,
Right.
but from my own perspective, I always felt that what I brought to the table was unique and significant enough, um, that it never, I guess I never got jealous about, or worried about things. I mean, with this latest wave of AI and ChatGPT and all these other things, I'm reading and listening to a lot of information about it, but I'm sort of reserving my judgment from making my decision one way or the other. Um, you know, a lot of it can sound scary, but I remember when people thought, when computers first came out, that they were going to take over. And I remember when Amazon came out and the internet and all that sort of stuff. So,
Right.
um, but then it makes everybody's life easier. So
Right.
I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what, and maybe because of where I am at now, I'm not as active in the mainstream part of the commercial part of the record business anymore. Um, I'm not as heavily involved anymore, so I'm not quite sure what the day to day or what the outlook is or what the planning within the industry is.
Yeah, I
Because
understand.
what I read, but I'm just not sure yet.
I
Um,
think it's like a two camp side, right? So I haven't found a really good blend yet. Some people are just like, I'm freaking out. And other people are like, wow, I can use this, right? I mean, whether that's, and then some are combining those things. I read an article and I've seen some YouTube videos how they're actually using chat GBT verbiage in certain imaging AI programs. And they're using the chat GBT to provide such a lengthy and appropriate description for that program. And then they put it in the program and they're coming up with these hyper realistic images, right? Which is great for marketing a lot of people because you don't have to go on the respective sites and go, okay, I want to click on this and click on this and pay X amount for whatever kind of image. Now I can create something that's realistic that I say, if I have a cleaning business, I can have three people cleaning a condo with a beach, theme or whatever else, and it populates this image for you. And now you can utilize that. So I think in the music industry, right, I'm hoping that it sounds like people are saying, hey, I can utilize these to whether it's modify or enhance music, whether that's the writing of notes and so on. I haven't played in that area yet, but it sounds like there's like two different camps. So speaking of that, and you sort of talked lightly about it, but so how did you, or would you say it was progressive of how you really like went from college playing with a friend to get into the music industry, what would be considered the official music industry? How did that really happen for you?
so that's a good question. I think my first, when you go to a school like Berkeley, you're surrounded by a lot of musicians. I was also in a bigger city than, I grew up in, or I went to high school in southern New Hampshire, and then all of a sudden I'm in Boston, and there's actually places to play and venues. Um, so that I wouldn't necessarily call that my first experience in the music industry per se, although in a way we were doing all the same things that anybody who gets in the industry does. We're trying to make our first CD and we're trying to do this and that and the other thing. But I would think that my first quote unquote industry experience was would be 2001. So before I graduated Berkeley, I started going on to these, message boards and websites, um, and I was looking for a major label. I was looking to basically get a gig as a guitar player with a major artist or a major label band. And so the band at the time, 2001, 2002, so it was called Cinematic, and it was a band on Atlantic Records. And I remember, emailing and sending whatever, information, and like any other kid out of college, like I went to Berkeley, blah 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 blah. And so all of a sudden I get a response back, and it says, yeah, we'd like you to come out, come out here and join the band. And we're on a major record deal and this and that and the other thing. And so I jump in my car, packed with all my gear, and I move out to Youngstown, Ohio. And Youngstown, Ohio, and I mean I still remember it like it was yesterday. I get there probably like at 7 in the morning, and I pull up to this farmhouse like in the middle of nowhere, and I was like calling the band. I said, I think I'm here.
Or in a very scary movie setting.
And I remember I remember they said we'll be there shortly, so I was waiting, and this Jeep, like a Jeep Cherokee, pulls up, and these four dudes get out of this Jeep, and they look like freaking, in excess just stepped out of this car, and I was like, man, I freaking made it. This is it. Um, and so that was it. The story after that, let's just say that it fits all the stereotypes of a rock and roll band, including the bitter end of it. It was about a year later after that.
Gotcha.
Then it took me back here, or it took me back to Boston, um, and then at that point, then I got back together with another band that I was in previously, and we were shopping record deals. And then I remember uh, I had a girlfriend, and she was a country singer, and she said, I got this producer in LA that's interested in me out there, and he works for this famous producer, and blah blah blah. And long story short, I'm out in LA at 2003, and luckily with a few of those immediate connections, um, things start happening. Then I hook up with the right agent who gets me all the auditions and everything for the right bands. And then I'm randomly in a bar at one night, and I get approached by these two producers who work for one of the one of the put it this way, he's one of the richest hip hop guys on the planet right now. So I ended up getting brought over to that camp, um, and from there it's just all a constant blur of nonstop hustle, like, because that's what it really is in the music game. You're just trying to do anything to get money.
Yeah.
You try. I'll do this. I'll do that. I'll play on the show. I'll do this. I'll play this. I'll manage your band for a cut. I'll try to get you gigs. I'll try to do this, and so it's just a nonstop hustle.
So two things with that. One, so there's some good books out there, and one of them being
Book.
Outlier.
What's that?
What's that?
Is it a book? What's that?
Yeah, right. Yeah. You read notes, but no words. So yeah, there's a good book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, and he talks about the 10,000 hour rule, right? And a lot of people say earning your way in. There's nothing that drops on it. You might find this famous person, whether it's a child or not, but they put in the time and effort. So it sounds like that's some of the stuff that you experienced by not only just meeting with people, but just starting the guitar. Like there's a lot of good stuff. I think he uses the instance in the book. He talks about the Beatles and where they played in some really small venues, and then it just eventually got more and more as far as popularity grew, and their timing and their syncing as a band. Did you witness that? Did you see anybody just come out like there's like, let's say there's a 3% chance of someone just shooting up to the top? But other than that, would you say that people that want to get in the music industry, there's a lot of, like you said, grind and hustle and grit, if you will, behind the scenes?
Well, I guess hindsight's always 2020, right? Now that I'm 45 and looking back, um, 10,000 hours seems like a small amount, right? Because you're always growing, you're always learning, and you're always, you don't get to play the game if you don't show up. That's the truth. So, with everything that I've done, looking back, I realized that the things that have proved most fruitful, or the things that I'm still doing, um, I put in a hell of a lot of time. and work into it. Um, a lot of my a lot of the peers, I will say this without trying to sound jealous or mean, but those with money or those who are born here, let's say with families that are already, nepotism or, families that are well established in entertainment or the entertainment industry or something to that effect, they definitely have a leg up in the situation. So um, they already have resources. They already have so I have seen people move quickly, um, move quickly than most because of their, I don't know, what's the word now, privilege,
Well, yeah,
because of their privilege or whatever you want to call it. But that is never that doesn't guarantee the success. So the most successful people I know um, didn't have that sort of privilege. They definitely were self-made. Most of the people I know. Um, so I think it all varies. And with that being said, also there are a heck of a lot of really talented people. Um, so to the extent of how far I made it, or did I make it? I think that's another thing that people have to think about. I think we're so focused on what we see in media and the finished product and instant gratification that we forget that there's a long journey and a lot of steps along the way, a lot
right.
of and a lot of failures. And I mean, even Katy Perry, I think she got dropped like from two or three previous labels prior to when she finally became successful.
Yeah.
So I think that there's just different varying degrees of what that is. To me, the fact that I'm 45 and uh, didn't get swallowed whole and spit out by the industry, and I can still make a living playing my instruments and things like that. I feel like I've made it in a certain.
Or died over an overdose, or the stereotypical, as you said. But so something interesting that you stated before, and it was a great transition, was like as far as the connections and networking, right? So a lot of people in different businesses, they found a lot of positivity to that. Some people look down on it because it says, hey, they say it's unfair, or like, I don't have that. I found that, like, again, in other industries, outside of the music industry, having connections, and I'm going to use that term loosely, really. It's people, it's people that have interest in either your skill sets, your company's skill sets. They come to a connection, and that connection has to do with fostering business. So it sounds like outside of maybe just the family privilege and everything, but you said, hey, I had this person, I played in this right area. Can you just talk a little bit more about the network and connections and how that sort of boosted, at least, maybe not, you're not on American Idol or anything as a judge like Katy Perry, but, like you said, you found your own sense of success. So can you just talk a little bit more about how you established that rapport and kept in touch with those people to leverage that network?
Yeah. Okay. So I think in a way because it probably had a lot to do with my military kid upbringing. Uh, Everywhere I went, I always had to make new friends, and every time I finally made some friends, I had to move and I had to go make some new ones. Uh, so uh, it was pretty natural for me to come out to a place, and not just in LA, but pretty much any place that I've ever been, and make connections with a lot of people. So, uh, you know, when I first moved out here, of course, I was in my mid to late 20s and I was going out every night and, going to the bars, going to the clubs, going to concerts, going to wherever I could, and just meeting people. Just talk. I'm very good at that. I could walk in a room and just be, hey, man, what are you doing here? Like, I don't have a problem with that. Um, and I have a pretty good memory and I'm pretty good at sort of sussing out people's skill sets or what they do. And then when I used to go back home, I would write down all these people's information and what they did, and uh, then I would kind of see like if I
So
met
you
like.
did that. So like some people will do, like if they get a business card, like I've done it before, you have to write like a little synopsis on the background so you don't forget. So you're saying you take little quick notes of the people that you met after that first meeting.
Well, more so mental notes, but what I would do is I would categorize these people. So I remember I would put like business cards in like separate sections, but these people are the musicians. These people work at a record label. These people, um, you know, work in reality television. So I was really good at kind of looking at these different things and then keeping in touch with people. And then somebody would say, "Man, I'll kind of jump into this real quick, but I was at one of my bands. We were at a marketing or a birthday party for these marketing executives of sponsors, and I remember this executive from a very well-known energy drink brand was saying, "Man, it's too bad that they don't make a band like Van Halen anymore." And I said, "Well, it just so happens that I actually produced a band. Check this out." And then, so what I really good was doing was recognizing different people and then bringing those people together, sort of like a broker, while also maintaining myself in the middle of the equation. And that's really what I mean. Even still to this day, that's what I do. It's just figuring out how to put pieces of the puzzle together and people together, and looking for
Yeah.
opportunities that can get us all.
So not to it stinks because I'd love to use a different reference point, but Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote a book called Blink, and he's written Tipping Point. I think Tipping Point actually talks to people to the definition of connectors and mavens and salesmen. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but connectors are like putting the right people together. And he uses the instance of mavens like, hey, I'm going to go to this town. And you're like, oh, go to this hotel and talk to Bob. You'll get a discount at this hotel. So I think connectors, and this is funny because it's sounding like a family trait more than just a one-off, because I do the same thing, right? Like it's just, I'm like, wait a minute, is this genetic or is this something learned? You know what I mean? But I think that's really important to have that skill set. So not only like for yourself and the growth, but like to bring other people together because it after repetition, it becomes recognized, right? And you can start to benefit from that, whether that's monetarily or just, sustainability in a business. So I think that's really important. Excuse me. So as far as like doing the like production stuff, right? So you're able to do the connections and here's the band and managing producing, which I want to talk a little bit later. But as far as like the audio engineering and the producing, was that a really large like transition? So I'm assuming you had some formal education, with that at Berkeley. And then like as far as like getting into the actual production side, the audio engineering, were you like, holy crap, there's like, because I'm always like, man, there's like 150 switches on this thing. Like, how do I get the ear to start to regulate all these different switches? Like how does that work?
So that's a good question, and this gives me a good chance to clarify. So, I would consider myself a producer, but I wouldn't go so far as to give myself enough kudos to call myself an audio engineer. And the reason for that is because, I mean, yeah, I can engineer by today's standards to some degree, but the real audio engineers that I know actually went to school for this stuff. They actually understand sound and frequencies, and I mean, I get nervous when I plug when I plug a quarter-inch jack in anywhere because I don't know what's going to happen. So, to all, I would say that I have a lot of friends that are audio engineers, and some of them are Grammy Award winning, highly acclaimed, and so I would feel I wouldn't even consider myself to be in that same category to use that term as an engineer for myself. I have engineering credits, sure. I've mixed albums, but it's the people that actually understand the real science of it. I think those people deserve to be called the engineers. I consider myself a producer because I can produce. I can turn out the finished product. A lot of what I do is by ear, by feel. I'll research real engineers tips on how to do things like EQ the low end properly of a mix or whatever. But that's the difference. So I didn't study like I said, when I went to Berkeley. At first it was performance, and then I went into music business. Um, Ironically, most of my career success probably has more to do in terms of the writing and production and things that I didn't actually go to school for at Berkeley. But I didn't go for, like I said, I never took one single engineering class other than YouTube University. But as far as what a producer does, a producer and an engineer they can be the same thing. It could be the same person, but there's two very different roles.
All right. No, thank you for clarifying that. I didn't know, right? I'm a music layman. I'm a consumer of music, but not a
Yeah, so the producer, I mean, I guess you can kind of think about, the equivalent, because whenever I talk to people in the film industry, and it's the director, I think, is more like the producer, and then you have all these other people on the team. But my job is to sort of, you know, see the vision or hear the vision or help develop that vision for an artist or um, or for a song or whatever, and then find the ingredients to put that together, and then maybe, um, you know, I can't help myself, but I have a lot of creative input in the things that I do, and at the end of the day, I have a finished product. But I could do that all myself, or like if I'm in a studio, I could hire an engineer, and an engineer's job is to really understand how those things are mic'd up properly, and you know what kind of compression ratios, and usually it goes something like this: Hey man, that guitar is sounding a little bit too bright. I think maybe we need to bring down the high end on it or something like that. The engineer will go, okay, and then make those adjustments. Or
And then out of the 150 switches, he goes to like number 35 and 36 and then moves it. And you're like, how did you even know?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a great way of describing it.
Yeah.
So to me, it's kind of interesting because um, I'm sure, like many professions, uh, you know, I can figure out this, or you could get an engineer to do it, and probably 9 times out of 10, or maybe like 7 out of 10, having somebody that actually understands that stuff is probably the more or probably the more efficient way to do it.
Yeah, I totally get that. So it's interesting too, because I think if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me. Not only did you produce, but you did manage at least one band that I'm aware of. So as far as the managing side goes, like, was that hey, I was producing this and somebody got a hold of me and asked me to manage, or like, how did you step into that role, going from transitioning from musician to producer and then getting to manager? How did that work out for you?
Well, it goes back to the jack of all trades, the master of none thing, right? Um, I've had managers, uh, in my artist days, but I've had to manage myself a lot as well. And I remember, I just because of I'm a control freak, and because of I guess my business acumen and whatnot, um, it just always I just always took it upon myself to start managing the situation. And the band that you're speaking in reference to is called Delta Rose, and they were a young rock, like teenage rock band out of Rosemead, California. And I was here in LA, and I remember I got a call from a friend who managed a nightclub and was like, "You got to check these guys out." And uh, I think initially the thought was to maybe produce some music for them. Um, and when I first met them, I was right away, hey, you guys could really do this, and you can, try this. And I was helping them carry their equipment,
Oh,
and
roadie. You didn't mention the roadie part. It's the
oh
side
man,
hustle.
the thing you do, especially as a young manager, you do whatever you can to help the
That's
band
right.
out.
That's right.
So, and then after I produced their stuff, uh, I was just because of my label experience and because of my experience dealing with all these other sorts of entities within the music industry, it just became a natural fit for me to manage them. And essentially, the way that the, the term manager, um, so a manager technically is an advisor. So a lot of people think, oh, if I get a manager, he's going to book me shows or this or that. But in California, it's illegal for a manager to actually book. You
Whoa.
have to have a license to be considered a booking agent.
Wow.
So an agent and a manager are two very separate things. But a manager is that sort of person that you trust along with you along your career. So what I did for Delta Rose was I helped Delta Rose find booking agents. I helped Delta Rose find financial managers. I helped them, in terms of negotiating their sponsorship agreements and things in that. And I just made sure that everything ran smoothly, and that I could try to steer them away from bad people, and try to give them the best advice. And
Like, don't
that's
throw TVs out of the hotel window. Like
or go to the hotel management and say, hey, look, here's a few $100, and let's
right.
just.
Look the other way. Well, it's interesting you said that. I didn't know that, right? And again, consuming music even through movies, like you mentioned earlier, it's usually like one person, right? Like it's always one person. The manager's on the phone, coming in the room with the band. Okay, guys, I just booked you a gig over at like the Blue Nightshade Lounge or whatever. It's like they never talk to like two different people. It's always like one person. So I find that like super interesting. I
Well,
had no idea about that.
that's and this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about people's perception of things in the media and the instant gratification that they're looking for. So a lot of times, um, one of the things I always talk about is if you look at some of these classic rock bands that you used to like back in the day. I don't want to name any band because I really love this band, but let's just put it this way: these dudes look like ugly old dudes on their album covers, but their songs are so freaking good. And I always joke about the fact that, well, the reason it was so good is because they had to play their whole entire lives to become these ugly men to make this good music. But now everything is sort of, it's like McDonald's, or fast food. You turn this thing out and then you throw a 16-year-old boy or girl or whatever now and make them half naked, and then it's like ready for sale, And
Yeah.
these people can't even play instruments. They can't perform live. Not all of them, but
Yeah.
a good majority. And so, I forgot why did I go off on that?
They've done a good job hiring the audio
Oh,
engineer.
right, right. No, what I was saying was, so a lot of the younger people, they don't realize that there's actually a team and all these things that sort of go into place to this. Had they had the experience of actually doing this for a number of years, they might understand how those parts work. But what's funny to me now is every young artist, I still get approached. I've had several clients and I worked for management companies since Delta Rose, but I can think of like in the last, several years, every young person that comes up to me and is like, I want you to manage me. Okay, do you know what that means? Yeah, just like make things happen. Okay, like what? Like, well, can you get me gigs? Well, no, a manager can't get gigs, right? And they're like, huh? Well, it's against the law. In fact, if you look at any contract, it'll say it. It'll say it. So you don't even know what a manager does. Well, my job is to advise you. My job is not to get you gigs. And then it's like, all right, well, I'm going to find somebody else who can get me gigs. Okay, well, you got to get an agent. But guess what? An agent won't get you gigs because the agents only make their money on on the 10% of the gig that they book. So if you're nobody, no one's going to be your agent because you're not making any money. So the problem with the younger generation, which and it's also our problem too, is like I find myself saying, oh, the younger generation, but the truth is that I'm not mad at them. It's just what they know.
Yeah.
But but what I see as a big problem is that uh, everything is so sensationalized and overhyped, and it looks so instant, and they're getting disappointed when they figure out that it's not instant. There's a
I
lot of
watched a really good documentary about Alanis Morissette the other day. And I didn't realize she started as a kid. I had zero idea. And unfortunately, she had some trauma that she experienced in the industry growing up. And that's what some of her later songs represented or reflected. And it was like striking because like growing up listening to songs, you're singing along, and then you hear behind the scenes, behind the stories and why they got to where they are and how they produced and how they sort of, she ran with her own thing. And it's like, wow, man, like it's striking. Now you listen to every word a lot differently and you understand the story behind that. And it's a huge representation. And like you said, it's interesting because I go back like Justin Timberlake, right, from the Mickey Mouse Club, and Miley Cyrus and all these people that started younger, Christina Aguilera, and then how they've progressed up. And now, like you said, in my opinion, again, a layman from the music industry side of the house, just a consumer, is you see these younger folks, whether they're teenagers, young adults, and some of them are shooting up. And then you see people clawing to get there. Like, just like, how do I get there? They're trying, and they're doing some unsightly things or whatever to try to get there. But to know, like you said, there's a team behind that. There's a team behind everything, the digital marketing side, to get people to be aware so you can get an agent and a manager and everything. I mean, there's all these things leading up to it. And then, like you said before too, is that musicality that people have is not what it used to be either. Sometimes it is the what do they call it, it's the it factor, and that doesn't necessarily always equate to I play good music, which I think is interesting as they start showing these shows like The Voice and so on. We have a local person here, Jared Herzog, I believe his name is, and he went on The Voice, and he's from the Floridian area that I'm in. And it's interesting, right? So he doesn't really talk too much. Like you said, there's a lot of people that probably do NDAs and all that stuff when they sign those documents going on the shows. But it's neat to have someone, right? And now it's cool because he plays at one of our local breweries. So it's neat to like go there, and he was on Team John Legend, and you get to like experience that. So that's a pretty cool thing just to witness. But again, like the pool of people, and you always hear it even on those shows, they go through a whole like screening process before they even get onto the show. I mean, it's there's so
Well,
much that happens prior to that.
yeah, that's another thing. I mean, it's I mean, I blame a lot of these shows as well because these American Idols and The Voice and all that. To me, I believe that they have no interest in the actual contestants or the people trying to make it. And though some have become successful, um, by and large, most haven't. And all these shows, in my opinion, are used to prop up the judges' own personal careers. And that's why I mean, look at all the judges. The judges are the famous ones, right? And the judges always are releasing new material. Well, can you tell me the last person who won American Idol is? Can you tell me the last, you know? So that's another. I mean, that's one of the reasons why wanted to get out of the music business and really focus in terms of my I call it my lesson business, but a lot of what that is also explaining to younger people the dangers. Because the one thing, in my opinion, that hasn't changed about the music industry is that it's still the shady. You know, I mean, there's a lot of good people in there, but at the top, show me one promo shot of a girl under 18 that's not hypersexualized, or
Yeah.
or a young man for that matter. And the way that they're making them tour, 300 days out of the year until where they're having nervous breakdowns and
Yeah.
stuff. So to me, the music industry is probably one of the most, if not the most um, toxic businesses.
Thanks for watching and listening part 1 of this interview with my cousin Billy. Get ready, part 2 coming soon.